Okay, let's unpack this. There's this idea, and it's been around for a long time, that history can be, well, frankly, a bit boring.
Mm-hmm. Dry textbooks, dates, names you can't pronounce.
Exactly. But what if maybe history isn't the problem? What if it's how it's told?
That's a great question. It flips the script, doesn't it? Suggests maybe our methods are just outdated.
And that's precisely what we're digging into today. This deep dive is all about how history is getting remixed, reevaluated, and sometimes, let's be honest, pretty misunderstood in our digital age.
Right.
We'll explore new ways people are connecting with the past, evolving views on things like gender roles and crime, and the huge and sometimes tricky role social media plays in all this.
You, the listener, should get a fresh perspective on how this information, especially historical stuff, flows and really impacts us today.
It shows the past isn't static,
Oh,
it's alive,
yeah.
constantly being reinterpreted.
Exactly. A living narrative.
So thinking about that disconnect many young people feel, let's talk about someone who seems to be cracking the code online, Lauren Sella.
Oh, yes. The history teacher on TikTok and Instagram. Millions of views.
Her whole philosophy is just, history's interesting. I think other people make it boring.
And she has a point. She argues it's made inaccessible, right? Like using overly academic language or just not telling all sides of the story.
Yeah, presenting this narrow view. And her method, it's almost like she's tricking people into learning.
In a good way. Breaking down complex stuff, WW1, Cold War, into these tiny, minute-long videos.
And the language is key. Inclusive, fun. The impact is kind of amazing. We saw comments like someone saying they got their PhD in 20th century history from her Cold War videos.
Or literally have never understood WW1 until right now. That's powerful feedback.
It really is. It shows people are hungry for this context, but maybe the old ways just weren't working.
It's accessibility, not necessarily dumbing down. That seems to be the key here.
And she totally gets how to use Gen Z slang. Like, for Tsar Nicholas II's failures, she calls it his Romanov flop era on God.
Flop era, meaning everything's failing, and on God, for emphasis, like for real.
Exactly. Or King Henry VIII defying the Pope. She frames his response as, bet, I'll make my own church. Bet.
Yeah.
Just meaning, okay, sure.
Huh, yeah. And using terms like Riz or pressed in titles, it grabs attention.
It creates this immediate connection. And it stems from her own past, right? She loved Liberty's Kids, American Girl.
Right, and she credits her own teachers, too. She sees that lack of connection as a real barrier for students now.
So Sella's success is fascinating, but it also kind of shines a light on this bigger issue, this history gap.
Mm-hmm. If TikTok is where kids are finally understanding WWII, what about everything after that?
Yeah, what are they missing? The awareness gap seems huge. Things like the fall of the Soviet Union.
Or the moon landing specifics, Reagan's presidency, Stonewall, Malcolm X.
Grenada, the Mujahideen. These aren't trivial footnotes. They shape the world we live in.
Absolutely. And the anecdotes you hear from teachers are, well, concerning.
Like the college student asking who won World War II after studying it.
Or thinking Lenin was in the Beatles. It sounds funny, but it points to a real problem.
Or the student thinking computers were ancient history, like Roman times. How does that even happen?
It's not just one thing, it seems. Part of it might be the curriculum itself, the pacing.
Spending ages on the Revolution or Civil War.
Right, which means the 20th century, especially post-WWII, gets rushed at the end of the year. Or just dropped entirely.
And then there's this whole too political angle.
Yeah, that's a worrying trend. Administrations telling teachers to avoid recent history because it might upset parents or voters.
Or states mandating American exceptionalism, which kind of limits critical takes, doesn't it?
It certainly can. And then there's this knowledge gap theory.
What's that exactly?
The idea is, in the push for critical thinking skills early on, schools might have cut back too much on basic history and science facts.
So, like, you need the facts first to even start thinking critically.
Sort of, yeah. Rote learning, basic knowledge, it's like the foundation. You can't build critical analysis on nothing.
Makes sense. And then, of course, there's social media, the observation that everyone learns from TikTok.
Which is great for engagement, Sella proves that. But it can also lead to these very narrow, algorithm-driven rabbit holes. Oversimplification is a risk.
You get the highlights maybe, but not the nuance.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really important part of this. Not just how history is taught, but what is taught and whose stories are being revisited.
Right, like challenging those traditional narratives, especially around women in crime. Historically, women were mostly seen as Victims, right?
Yeah.
Less involved in serious violence.
Yeah, the saying was, violence was not a woman's business. If they were violent, it was often seen as just copying men or confined to the home.
Which overlooks a lot of complexity, I imagine.
Definitely. And a striking example of challenging this is Hallie Rubenhold's book, The Five, about Jack the Ripper's victims.
Ah, right. She argues against the old assumption that they were all prostitutes.
Precisely. Her research found solid evidence from maybe one, Mary Jane Kelly, and possibly another, Elizabeth Stride, but not the others.
And she points out the definition of prostitute back then was pretty murky anyway.
Absolutely. Her driving force was, she said, anger. That these women were just silenced for 130 years. Nobody asked the basic question. Who were they?
She called it a terrible indictment of us. Powerful stuff.
And predictable backlash followed, right, from ripperologists.
Yeah, accusing her of lying, having a feminist agenda, because her findings threatened their core belief. Ripper killed prostitutes. End of story.
It shows how resistant people can be to changing established narratives, even historical ones.
But what she achieved was incredible, taking these women who left no diaries, nothing, and piecing together their lives.
Turning them from ciphers, as she put it, into real people. Giving them back their humanity. It's amazing historical detective work.
Truly. And this reevaluation, it's happening in academia too, like in criminology.
Definitely. Feminist movements really pushed a shift. Early theories often blamed female crime on, biology or their sexuality.
Pathologizing it, basically.
Right. But later feminist theories looked at the bigger picture. Gender roles, patriarchy, inequality.
Wasn't there that liberation hypothesis in the 70s, like more freedom equals more crime, matching men?
There was. Adler and Simon proposed that. But later research, like Steffens Myers, showed it wasn't quite that simple.
What did he find?
Female arrest rates did go up, yes, but the gap with men wasn't really closing for serious crimes. The increases were more in things like shoplifting, bad checks.
Stuff linked more to daily life, like shopping.
Kind of. He linked it to changes like self-service stores, more access to credit. Plus, maybe police attitudes were changing too, more willingness to arrest women for petty offenses.
Interesting. And this connects to modern issues, too, like how we define and handle sexual violence.
Absolutely. Recognizing things like date rape or acquaintance rape as violence, not just bad behavior. That led to policy changes, education, lawsuits.
And the specific struggles of women in the prison system often get overlooked.
Hugely overlooked. Things like, 80% are mothers, often meaning kids end up in foster care.
And the fact that some women enter prison pregnant. The issues around that, like shackling during labor, it's deeply concerning.
These are critical justice issues tied directly to gender.
Okay, let's shift to something really extreme, but unfortunately relevant. Honor killings.
Honor-based violence, or HBV. Violence mostly against women to protect a family or community's honor.
Tied into patriarchal structures where women are seen almost as property.
That's often the context, yes.
Yeah.
And the scale is shocking. The WHO estimated around 5,000 honor murders a year globally back in 2012. Very high rates in some regions like the Eastern Mediterranean.
And the methods are just brutal. Stabbing, burning, stoning.
Strangulation, forced falls, poison, axes, guns. And crucially, these are often collective acts.
It's not just one person snapping. It's decided by a family council based on cultural norms about women's behavior needing group approval.
Exactly, but here's a really surprising finding from a Palestinian study.
What's that?
Killing female relatives to restore honor, it backfired, it didn't restore honor, it damaged the family's reputation.
Really? So it led to social isolation?
Yes, social death, rejection, stigma, it completely undermines the perpetrator's justification.
That's fascinating and tragic. And there was that Kuwait study, too.
Yeah, 2018, found half the people thought violence was okay for adultery, and a third, men and women, wanted laws to punish adulterous women. Shows how deep these tribal and cultural norms can run.
Which brings us back, inevitably, to social media, this double-edged sword.
Right. Amazing for spreading knowledge, connecting people, but also perfect for spreading stereotypes and misinformation.
The reach is just immense. TikTok outpacing Google visits in 2021, average American watching 80 minutes a day.
It thrived on short videos, remixes, duets. It's become a visual search engine for nearly half of Gen Z.
And meme culture is a huge part of that, like digital graffiti, right? Using humor, satire.
Responding to events, reflecting stereotypes, sometimes reinforcing them, but it also allows for emergent storytelling. Think #MeToo, power shifting.
But then you get the influencer side. Andrew Tate being a prime, if controversial, example.
Hugely popular, self-styled king of misogyny. eventually banned from TikTok.
His appeal seems to be offering young men these recipes for money, success, women escaping the matrix.
Positioning himself as a self-help guru, tapping into anxieties.
But the content itself, studies show, is deeply problematic, promoting very traditional dominant masculinity.
Linked to physique, wealth, showing off cars, cash, planes, all very stereotypical markers.
And this narrative of masculinity in crisis, painting men as victims, critics as aggressors.
Creating this defensive posture. And his comments about women.
Yeah, claims he loves them, then says they're less calm, can't fight, belong in nurseries.
Contrasting rich countries where women get to be stupid and men pussies, apparently, with poorer countries maintaining natural gender roles. It's blatant stereotyping.
And outright depictions of objectification and violence, grip her by the neck, pick you up by your titty.
It's shocking. And then the historical normalization, using Hitler as a business strategy example.
Hitler used blitzkrieg. You need speed. That's chillingly devoid of context.
Completely. It just focuses on perceived success, normalizing an abhorrent figure. This relates to that powerful media theory.
Where media sets the agenda, influences what we even talk about.
Exactly. Influencers like Tate can really dominate the discourse within their follower base.
And the danger is that social media just simplifies everything, reproduces stereotypes, maybe even faster, sometimes just for clicks or entertainment.
Yeah, potentially erasing the nuance or the actual harm, like that Sweet Brown meme example focus shifts from a real tragedy, a fire, to just a caricature.
So wrapping this up, it's clear history is being constantly reshaped online, isn't it?
Definitely. Platforms like TikTok are changing how we engage. And at the same time, narratives about gender, crime, silenced voices, they're being challenged and re-examined.
Often shattering old assumptions.
Yeah.
And then you have influencers wielding huge power, sometimes using history or stereotypes in really problematic ways.
It's a dynamic mix. Formal education, informal online learning, old stories versus new discoveries, all swirling in this digital influence.
So it leaves us with a question, perhaps, for you listening. In this age where information, especially history, gets remixed, reevaluated, delivered in these bite-sized social media pieces, how do you make sure you're getting more than just fragments?
How do you build that nuanced, critical understanding of all these complex stories, past and present, that shape our world?